today's Coaching Coordinator podcast, we're going to talk about honesty and the transparency you need with all your stakeholders today. We're going to particularly focus on the parents. And joining me to discuss that is the head football coach at Rose Hill High School in Kansas, Lee Weber. Coach, great to have you here on the podcast.
Hey, fantastic to be here. Love listening to you guys' stuff. It's fantastic.
Coach, the other day I came across some of your stuff on Twitter. I think it was maybe on one of the chats. And it was about a process that you put together really to, I guess, I don't want to say control. I don't think that's the right word, but certainly bring to attention what's happening in the stands, right? And certainly a lot of positive can come from our fans, our parents, and that's what we want. But, you know, there's, in being a parent of a high school senior myself, there's those times where there are frustrations as a parent and you know, isn't necessarily maybe what you had envisioned going on or happening with your kid or even happening in a particular game. And sometimes those things get too vocal. And I think we have to remember these are high school athletes. This is a different setting. It's not like, you know, going to a game where there's 100,000 people there, that a lot of these things get heard. And we have to remember too, you know, sitting in those stands, that somewhere around us are the, you know, the spouses, the children of those coaches down on the field as well. So I think is a very positive step that you took. And I guess if you would explain how this idea came about for you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, you know, I guess, you know, one thing I would tell all the coaches out there is, you know, one thing that was always hard for me to understand, you know, I thought I grasped it, was what it was like to be a parent in the stands. And I really honestly never had a clue, because now I have a 5-year-old that plays t-ball, and I get it. I understand. I consciously made the decision. I'm not going to coach him. I'm going to let somebody else coach him. And I have to sit in the stands and bite my tongue. And now I realize what it's like. And until you have that perspective, it's hard to understand what it's like to be a parent. You know, we always say, with our, you know, I always tell my assistant coaches, the thing we have to realize is that, you know, every parent really wants we're dealing with their pride and joy. And they want their pride and joy to succeed, and excel. And a lot of times football, they want their kid and the 10 other best players on the field. That's their role as a parent. They want the best for their kid. And so we have to embrace that a little bit. And this idea that I had really came about was from different struggles that, you know, I've had in different spots. I've coached at 4 or 5 different schools. And in fact, you know, really came across this. I had a bad experience at my last school where it's my wife's hometown. It was supposed to be my end-all, be-all job. You know, this is a place I'm going to land and stay forever. And it's where my wife's from. And some people just, you know, really got very nasty in the stands at some of our performances. And there's times we didn't play very well. I thought we were doing okay, and then kids were playing to, I thought, our potential, and that wasn't good enough for some people. And they kind of took it out on me, and my wife is sitting there having to listen to people that she worked with before when she was, you know, she had lived in town when she was a kid, and it just became a really bad situation. So when I took the new job at Rose Hill, you know, I was like, this cannot happen again. I can't let this happen to my wife. Just watching her and my 2-year-old in tears after a game, after what people were saying about me, I was like, I can't let this happen again. And as I came into Rose Hill, the administration warned me. They said, you know, our fans were pretty nasty to the former coach and our offensive coordinator who's still on staff. And, you know, there was some, you know, back and forth between them, and we kind of had to stop some things, and it just wasn't a good situation. And I was just, you know, really trying to brainstorm, how can I solve this problem? How can we curb this? How can we head it off at the pass? And for the life of me, I wish I could remember what coach gave this to me, because I'd love to give him credit. But it was a baseball coach, I think, in Texas, that had posted a little snippet on Twitter, and it made me dive in and ask him more questions. And he said they curbed, you know, the yelling and things they got from the stands. You know, as a football coach, we probably don't. I honestly do hear a lot of the stuff. I don't know why. I can't filter it out. I know other football coaches can. Maybe it's my fault. You know, it's my own weakness is that I hear some of that stuff. But he said we curbed a lot of that by polling our players and asking them, what do you want to hear from your parents and guardians in the stands? What don't you want to hear? And then an important one for me is, what do you want to hear from your parents after the game? And what don't you want to hear from your parents after the game? They said it changed their culture with their parents and the interaction with their players, the officials, and the coaches. And I said, this is perfect. I said, it's come, and I asked him, I said, how do you know you're going to get the answers that you want to get? And the guy said, the kids are very honest, and they're going to give you the answers that you really realistically want to hear. And that's what we got from our poll is, come in blind. I just sent a poll out to all the players, and I said, what do you want to hear from your parents and guardians in the stands? What you don't want to hear? And what do you want to hear from after the game? I think we just trimmed it down to those three. And I just sent that out and asked them in a Google form and asked them to type back. And, we didn't get 100% response. I didn't track kids down and make them do it, but we got a really good response because it was a pretty emotional issue for a lot of them. And, the kids answered just, I guess it worked out perfectly. They said the exact things that you and I would want them to say. A lot of them felt like their parents were embarrassing them in the stands. They felt embarrassed over the behavior of some of the parents and guardians. And I read through some. It wasn't terrible, but it was good to know, one, and two, how can we use this information? And so the coach said, what you do is you take the results from that survey and you show it at your parent meeting. And so that's what we did. I took all the statements, if several were close, I kind of combined and, I kind of put the results. I would have loved to have a graph, but, kids answer in different ways. And, I've got it pulled up right in front of me from the first one I did. And, the first thing we asked is, we thought we'd start with a positive. What do you want to hear? And, the kids wanted to hear supportive statements and encouragement and positive statements and great plays and you'll get it next time. They wanted positives. They wanted to hear cowbells and clapping and anything positive. Positive just kept popping up with all these kids that, hey, we want to hear positive. And remember, this is a program that went 1-8
right.
the year before I got there. And we went 1-8 my first year. Essentially the same season. But the difference in the stands from those who had the experience both years was completely different because we did this. Then the really telling one is, what don't you want to hear from your parents? And we have yelling at the coaches, cussing and yelling at the officials, direct statement, these refs blow, criticism, stupid comments that don't need to be said. That was awful. Run the ball more, pass the ball more. And that was the same kid said to both of them. Run the ball more, pass. That kid gets it. Like he knows that the parent just spouting stuff. Bashing the coaches, negatives, you suck, how such player is not good, and negative statements. And there was 3 slides of what you don't want to hear. The kids were very good about all the things they don't want to hear. I don't want to hear swearing or harsh language, cursing, yelling at the officials. I mean, the kids, I didn't have to, you'd think maybe you'd have to add one in if you're kind of being dishonest about it. And, hey, I got to make sure we hit this. I didn't have to even think about that. They covered every topic that these parents needed to hear. Again, cussing at the officials, bad comments about how the game went differently. I mean, now I'm on slide 5. There's like 5 slides of these things they don't want to hear. And so we showed that in our parent meeting. I kind of told the parents the expectation, and then I popped this up and I said, this is what your kids said. And jaws dropped. People just went, oh. And it was just kind of like a realization for them. They woke up and they're like, oh, this is what it looks like for my kid. Because their kid is their pride and joy. And when they realize, I'm embarrassing my child, hey, or this is how my kid feels about that, it hits a nerve with them. And, somebody told me they thought it'd be more powerful I had the kids say it. And that's really a kind of a tough spot to put their kids in. I feel like, you have to have a pretty strong kid. They have to be pretty confident themselves to stand up and say these things in front of everybody else. But for me to put it up and just say, this is what your kid said, their jaws just dropped. They were like, oh, man, you're right. And it set them back a little bit. Now, you wish that everybody that needed to hear that was at the parent meeting. But that doesn't work out sometimes. Sometimes the ones that need to hear it most don't show up and then show up for the game and start yelling stuff. And we have that happen every once in a while. We don't we don't actually survey the kids every year. We kind of do it every other year. And that way, we kind of use the data twice. And as it's progressed, we haven't need to use it as much. We've established the culture, but it was really great. And then, the last thing we did was, what do you want to hear from your parents and guardians after the game? Because I've been in so many places where the kid, goes to, parents after the game, and instead of, getting a hug, and there's plenty of kids that get hugged and kissed and take pictures. We're the picture-taking people in the world at Rose Hill after we win. There's so many pictures taken. But you'll see some kids that are just getting chewed out by their parents, and I was like, man, we need to add this in. This is an important part. What does the kid need to hear after the game? And I don't know who said this first, but the most important thing I always think you can tell your kid, and I tell my son this after T-ball games, is I love watching you play.
Yeah.
And so we wanted the kids to tell their parents in their own words what they wanted to hear from their parents. It was good job, honest truth about my performance, good job, congratulations, you did great, good game. I'm taken back to, I don't know if you're a Ted Lasso fan, but the scene in the last episode of Ted Lasso where the dad's yelling at his son that passed the ball instead of scoring the goal himself, like that strikes a nerve. I see that happen so many times in sports, is where kid gets yelled at because he didn't do what his dad or mom thought he should have. And
right.
I don't want to be that parent. And I want to give those kids, I want to help that kid out as much as possible to not have that experience, because it's just not what you want after a game. Like, you don't want to, the kid already knows what they did wrong.
Right.
Or what they probably could have done differently. They want to hear that their parents love them and that they enjoyed watching them play. I was blessed. I don't know whether blessed or cursed, but my dad never played football. My mom and dad are not sports people. My dad's a farmer. My mom was a grocery store clerk. And they had no clue about football, but they would come watch my football games. And the only thing that they knew is they knew when their son tried hard or didn't try hard. They could tell my effort. Mm-hmm. And they would always just say, they love watching me play. And if I didn't play hard, they would call me out on that, which I needed to be called out on that. But, they didn't critique my performance. They didn't tell me I should have blocked this person or that person or tackled this person or that person, or I did my assignments wrong. And while maybe I wasn't a seasoned player coming in, it was just that experience of my parents knew no better than to just love their kid. And so sometimes I try to pass that on to people.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I had read that years ago when my kids were just getting into sports, that, when they're done, tell them you love watching them play, or, love how hard you work, or something positive along those lines, win or lose. And, as a coach, it's especially the sports well, it's tough to not coach them up. But they don't need that at the time. I always, would leave it at that, and later the next day maybe revisit some things. And for me, it was always questions, wasn't going to tell them, or suggestion like, hey, did you ever think about this? Or, trying to understand, what they might be thinking, or how they were doing things, or maybe what they're struggling with. So you can find them the help if you can't give it to them. But, in those immediate moments after, right, it's not, just like coaches, we don't necessarily immediately sit down and decompress. We decompress from everything for a while before we get it back into breaking it down. What went well, what didn't went well. That's going to happen the next morning, right? And so for our players, I think it's the same thing they need, right? They just expended a lot of energy, both physical and emotional and mental, and for them to then start to take on whatever a parent might give them, and I see it all the time. That's difficult. They don't want to hear about, you should do this in your stance, or, what was wrong with your shot, or, anything you could think of. It's not the time, right? And so I think that's such a valuable thing that you shared that with your parents. Question I thought of as you were going through that now is did that make its way down to the other, younger levels of your program?
It hasn't, but, it's a great idea to do so. And I especially think, some of the problems we see start in youth football. Mm-hmm. And so the youth coach, typically sometimes that's where one of the biggest issues I had with a parent was he was the youth football coach. And so when his kid came to play for me after, he didn't play for 3 years and played his senior year, and the kid just decided to be a wrestler and wanted to go all in on wrestling. His friends convinced him to go out for football, and then dad had been the youth football coach. He couldn't let go of that role. He couldn't let go of being the football coach. And so whatever I was doing, he had to, tell us about it. And, that is it needs to happen, I think, at that younger level. But the issue would be, are the young kids mature enough to say that? I think it has to be adapted. This is, maybe a presentation of this is what players want to hear. This is maybe a little bit more guidance, because I don't know whether, a 10-year-old football player, maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. I don't have a lot of experience with 10-year-olds. I have a 5-year-old, and I've coached high school kids my whole life. And so, even a 10-year-old probably knows, hey, I want to hear somebody say good job.
Yeah.
Or I want to be told good job after the game. And so, I think it's something that should be it's a great thought for youth football and especially junior high football, because I think that's where people start to see, some of those issues come out. And we're not helping ourselves, I think, as a society with pro sports and college sports. I'm been a basketball official for 15 years, and I think some people lose sight at the high school level and the youth level that this is an educational process. This is we're doing this to educate kids, and it's a classroom outside a classroom, and it's not a pro sporting event. It's yelling and booing and those things. That happens, yeah, but is that appropriate for our level? And I really think about the people who are yelling at a 16-year-old to shoot the ball or throw the ball or block somebody. One, they already know that stuff. Like anybody who's ever yelled, offensive line, block somebody, like, what do you think they're supposed to do? We're yelling the obvious, but, yelling at a 16-year-old, I don't think that in any other place in society, that would be frowned upon. Nobody's going into somebody's office and yelling at them to do their job, as they're just a random observer. And, but pro sports and college sports have, led that to be, hey, that's okay. And that's part of the fun of the game. That's part of the atmosphere. And I don't know that it has a place in scholastic sports.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a different approach to it. And again, the information you compiled, I think, is useful at the youth level. And maybe it's not to the extent of detail that you need, but even putting something together, just thinking of ways to share that, right? Making sure that it's shared out with your coaches, maybe through your social media account. You put something on there too that just is, gets in front of people that way who are in your program from the youngest levels all the way up, that just becomes part of your culture, that this is how we do it here, right? This is the expectation, etc. But it's really based on, this is what your kids want. I think that's very powerful there. Looking at this process, which you did with your players, and getting the feedback, I think is very useful also in getting feedback on your own coaching and your staff's coaching. And again, some of those things, just understanding a little bit better about individual players and the group as a whole, what really are the things that are useful to them and how that they're coached. I can't remember, I think it was the Cool Clinic, and one of the guys was telling the story of, and again, I wish I remember who it was, but he was telling the story about Orlando Pace, coaching Orlando Pace, and his first time with him. And, this guy's an all-pro and everything, one of the best in the league. And, first rep, this guy's in there in an individual period, says, good job. And, Orlando turned around and told him, like, coach me, right? Like, good job doesn't necessarily help anybody, right? And I think it's one of those things. I heard someone, on this podcast say once that if your mom can say it from the stands, it's not a coaching point. So again, just understanding better, what are the things we do? Maybe what are some of our blind spots, things we need to develop as coaches that that process can work very well for that as well, and being able to get that information out of players.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, and I've never really done this completely, but I do let this kind of mold the way we do things. It's like the love languages. You know, I used to teach sex ed, so that was a fun time.
Right.
But you talk about the love language and how people feel appreciated or feel affection, and you kind of have to apply that. You know, some kids need verbal affirmation. Some kids need to be motivated externally. You know, they need gifts. Some kids are motivated by a pat on the back, where other kids don't want you to touch them. You know, and so without calling it love languages, because I don't think that goes over with my guys very well. They wouldn't understand that. You know, you kind of have to survey them and talk to them about how do you want to be coached. And, you know, a lot of times it's not anything formal for us. It's more on observation. This works, this doesn't. And other times it's just flat out asking the kid, you know, what do I need to do to coach you better because you're not performing? You know, I'm a track coach, and so I deal a lot with the kids on the individual levels. And, you know, my kids, one is just being, I guess, confident and strong enough as an athlete and confident and strong enough as a coach to have a relationship where there can be honest communication back and forth. You know, I have to be strong enough as a coach to realize, okay, my method that I prefer may not be what they prefer. And that kid's got to be strong enough to be able to tell me, Coach, this is how I need to be coached. I need you. I have a discus thrower. And he was mad at me. And I said, why were you mad? He goes, Coach, you weren't there when I threw the discus. And I said, I have 25 other people. He goes, Coach, I need you there. I need what you need. I need you to tell me what I need to fix because I struggled today. And he was strong enough to tell me that. And, you know, I thought he was good. Like, you know, when you have 25 throwers and one coach or two coaches working with those people, you know, you can't watch them all at the same time.
Right.
And, you know, so some guys need a little bit more. Some guys want you to watch it, and they need to be able to speak up. But you've got to be able to, I think, as a coach, you know, foster the environment for that to happen. You know, we don't often or try not to often be just a, you know, stand and deliver program where I talk, you listen, you do it. You know, we want our kids to be active problem solvers. And, you know, a lot of times we give our kids, you know, we'll have them watch film and have them come back and tell us, what did you see? What did you notice? Because they might see things. It's just opening it up so that the players have some, you know, people say use the word buy-in and stuff like that all the time. But it's just they have an open platform to be able to talk to us. And as a coach, I have to be ready also to hear some things that maybe I don't want to hear. You know, like, there might be a kid that comes to me. If I open that channel, there might be a kid that comes and say, Coach, you know, I was pretty pissed off at you today, and I don't think you did a very good job coaching us. And I have to be able to, if I'm going to open that door, I have to be able to let people walk in it. And, you know, I might bristle up at that, but then I have to realize, okay, that's, you know, I opened the door. I asked for feedback. And so this is the feedback I'm getting. One of the best coaching evaluations I ever got, my AD had left, and so the principal who used to be an AD, he did my evaluation. And after the season, he interviewed 5 of my seniors and talked to them about how I coached and what they felt about my coaching ability, whether I gave them any ownership in the program. And it just happened that year, to win a game, we got in the huddle, and I talked to the kids, and I'm like, hey, what do we run? What do you feel great about? The kid was like, hey, Coach, if we run smash and if I run a slant instead of a hitch, I'm going to be wide open. And he was wide open. We won the game. And that kid told my principal, he's like, you know, he let us have some ownership in us and let us tell him what we thought would work, and he trusted us. And to this day, it's like one of the, you know, compliment from me and my principal was like, you know, that told me everything I need to know about you as a coach is that you care enough about the kids to listen to them and trust them. And luckily it worked. So, yeah,
right.
Also, if it wouldn't have worked, yeah, it wouldn't have been. And I did, you know, I've done that later on. You know, I was bound and determined in overtime one time to call, you know, our kind of go-to 2-point pass play on 4th and 1. And my kids looked me in the eye and said, Coach, you know, we need to run power. We need to run double ISO. We need to run double ISO. We can do this. And I said, you believe in it? And they said, yes, Coach, this is what we need to do. And I said, that's fine. Let's do it. and we won the game. And, the celebratory pictures I have on my wall somewhere is those kids standing with their hands up because they made the call.
Mm-hmm.
And, I trusted them, and they were right.
Yeah.
And so those are huge moments when you have them.
Yeah, and it's that feedback that you get. And I know, again, just looking at things and trying to understand what's best, I was actually thinking about this the other day that, and even looking at some of the things I've done before, we try to use all of these, coaching tools to get the feedback from our players, et cetera. And I really feel like, and I can remember at some points just allowing kids to fill something out without their name on it. But I think with what we're trying to promote most of our programs, if our programs are about trust and developing relationships, then anonymous shouldn't be a part of it, right? We need to have that communication back and forth. And, to me, that's an important part of it. And, as coaches, as you create tools, I think that's something to think about, right? And to explain, like, you don't want it anonymous because, as you talked about, a lot of this becomes individualized. You get to understand a little bit more about those individuals, learn more about them, and that has to be part of the process. So it does require that back and forth trust.
Oh, absolutely. If it's a real trust situation, it can't be anonymous. You're asking for ownership. We always tell the kids, we want you to own your effort, own our program. We have a pledge on our wall that I used to print out, and the kids would sign it. You sign it, you own it. It's hard to own something anonymously. And even if it's your opinion or your idea, own that idea. Own your statements, own your words that you're going to speak. And so anonymous typically, when you did that, you did the complaint box or something. You've always seen people. I've never done a complaint box, but you see a complaint box. I rarely feel like those are ever productive because the kids just know. I think that you're never the message or the solution never hits home because you didn't know who to deliver the solution to. And each kid needs to be treated differently and coached differently within the whole team concept. And so there are a couple of my guys. We sent a kid to TCU this year, and I got after, I talked to him after my offensive line coach really got after him. I said, hey, he's just trying to make it better. He goes, Coach, it's okay. This is what I want. I want to be coached hard because that's what I need to, that's what motivates me. Mm-hmm. And, whereas if that was anonymous, I would just have neutered my offensive line coach. But he knew what buttons to push with this kid. And I needed to know, once I had a conversation with the kid, now I understand. All right, this is, but if it was anonymous, one of the other kids said, offensive line coach is, he gets after us too much. And then I go talk to him and he tones it down, then this kid didn't get what he needed, But my offensive line coach is really good. He knows I can push this kid's button, and this kid, I push different buttons. I love this one up because that's what he needs. This one, I need to kind of get after a little bit to get the most out of him, and he's okay with that. And so you have to individualize your coaching. I think it's lazy coaching just to coach everybody the same way. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a lot of effort to coach everybody the same way. It does take a lot of effort to realize I need to push these buttons with this kid and these buttons with that kid. And, it's not being inconsistent. It's coaching how they need to be coached to be the best.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, I know, and first of all, thank you for sharing some of these ideas here today. I know you do spend some time putting your resources out there. So where can our coaches find more? And I know you have a book to talk about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish that this lesson about the parents and the survey we did was in my book. I had COVID, and so I had 10 days in quarantine. And I've always wanted to write a book, and I wanted to write the book that I needed when I was a young coach. And so I sat down for 10 days while I was locked in my basement, away from my family, away from everybody else, had my food delivered like I was in some sort of prison. And I just sat down and wrote this book called the Head Coaching Mentorship Manual. And you can find it on Amazon. It has about 30 different lessons from my 21 years of being a head high school football coach, little tips, tricks, and things that that I needed to know along the way that hopefully other coaches who are looking to become a head coach will look at that book and say, oh, this was, I need this, or it'll help them out in the end, I think, in having a better experience. I love my experience as a coach, but I wish I knew then what I know now. I'd have been a lot better. And so I want to pay it forward to other coaches. So, it's on Amazon. I have a couple CoachTube courses out. I have kind of a tech nerd a little bit, a free lap timing system nerd. So I have a book on how to run the free lap timing system, which is a great tool for football coaches and track coaches. I have a speed development program kind of geared toward track on CoachTube. And then I have if you go to my Twitter, @CoachLaw71, my pinned tweet takes you to my coaching resources website. And I have some different strength and conditioning resources for sale there, and some other coaching presentations, some football stuff, little football stuff, some performance stuff, some free things for coaches. I'm trying to put out all those things I can. Sometimes I call myself the Walmart of coaching resources. All my stuff's pretty cheap, $5-10. Not trying to get rich. I'm just trying to help coaches out and get a little, help my family out a little bit at the same time.
Yeah, great follow on Twitter, and he does share a lot of those resources there and communicates with you as well. Again, it's @CoachLaw71. Coach, I appreciate you taking the time with us, and best of luck to you and your team in 2021.
Hey, thank you, Coach. It's been an absolute pleasure to come on.
Thanks again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. Please check out all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com. We've got some great things coming for you in May, and for the last 3 months or so of this offseason, we'll be back with All In on Offense and our deep dive on defense. And we have some great interviews with coaches, as well as some quick casts that we'll throw in there. Check out all we're doing again at coachandcoordinator.com, and follow me on Twitter @CoachKGrabowski.